Salutations, respected viewers. I'm George from Ireland. This video is going to be about Fox News, and it will lead into American policy more generally, and delusions, I suppose, and how American foreign policy in particular, how that impacts on electoral politics, and indeed how the military-industrial complex helps to shape American foreign policy. So Fox News used to have the temerity to have a motto which was fair and balanced, when it's about as unfair and unbalanced as one could possibly imagine. So it was the big lie right at the top of the screen. It is mentally unbalanced almost some of the time. You'd look at the hosts, and obviously they're advancing a hard right agenda. Fine. They're certainly entitled to express their opinions and to slant things a certain way, but don't then call yourself fair and balanced. So they drop that one. And you look at Sean Hannity, who campaigned for Trump at a rally, supposed to be covering the rally, campaigned for it. Sean Hannity, who says he's not a journalist, who says that he is a journalist, who can never make his mind up. No wonder it's Trump's favourite channel, because, you know, Fox is really a set of publicists for the Trump administration, and that's why he'd phone into them and speak to them rambling for half an hour on their show. So there's obviously flagrant lying from this channel, like Sean Hannity claiming that he and his colleagues had been illegally surveilled by the Obama administration, a lie he never repeated. He was then taken off air briefly, hoping that the viewing public would forget that one. Fox could be frank about being white nationalists, about being hyper-capitalists. Now, in fairness, they did have occasionally a liberal left host. There was that chap Coombs, who has passed away since. And there's Chris Wallace, does some sterling work. He asks some worthwhile questions, really puts some of the White House on the spot. But you look at some of their hosts and their detestable views. Judge Jeanine Pirro saying that hijabs are un-American. She tweeted that hijab is from Sharia law, and it's the antithesis of the US Constitution. Now, Sharia law does not demand the hijab. It's true that many Muslim women choose to wear it, probably a minority of Muslim women in the world, and is the law of the land in certain countries, well, Saudi Arabia, for instance, but it's not in the Quran or indeed in the Hadith, which just say, modesty, the best veil is behind the eyes, and things like that. So where would Sharia law and the US Constitution agree? They'd agree more than Judge Pirro would care to admit. They both permitted slavery. Obviously, the Constitution's been changed. It didn't explicitly say slavery was okay, but slavery was held to be entirely compatible with the Constitution until 1865. The Constitution does not outlaw plural marriage. Well, Sharia law allows it as well. The Constitution obviously did not disbar the United States from manifest destiny, from just conquering Native American land and subjugating the Native Americans. Obviously no respect for their property. And under Sharia law, well, the Muslims starting out in Saudi Arabia conquered so much of the Middle East, or well, land from Morocco to Indonesia, really, well beyond the Middle East. Corporal punishment, well, that's there in Sharia law, and the US Constitution certainly used to allow that. The death penalty, the United States is alone in the Western world in using the death penalty. Not just the states, and not all of the states, all right, but the federal government too. And no women's rights in the US Constitution, saying all men are created equal. Oh, but men was held to mean people, male or female. But in the early days, of course, married women couldn't own property separate from their husbands. It's only through the 19th century, certain state legislatures and certain courts evolved the doctrine that women can own property separately from their husbands. Women actually had more rights under Islam in that sense, in terms of property ownership. So the US government supported Sharia governments abroad. Dick Cheney talking about friends and allies in Saudi Arabia. Trump absolutely adores the Saudi Arabians, as he's publicly said. They pay him money, and that's the bottom line. That's all that counts, not law, not morality. Pakistan was a US ally for years, and until very recently was receiving billions of dollars in military aid. The US has a very cozy relationship with Qatar, where it's got military bases, good relationship with Pakistan. Egypt is a huge recipient of military aid, and Egypt is not exactly a Sharia state. It's part of the way there. For example, a woman faces jail for wearing a dress which revealed her legs. a woman who ate a banana suggestively on television suggested that having a child outside wedlock was permissible. She's been imprisoned, and on and on. So it's really nauseating that Judge Pirro should say this, but people would have said that Catholics were un-American. They were saying that in the 1840s, the know-nothings. I remember reading an account of the Boston Massacre before the Revolution, and some of the people hanging around when trouble broke out were called Taigs, Taig being a pejorative term for Irish Catholics. And Jews were un-American, and really every sort of ethnic minority. Oh, the Chinese mustn't be let in, they're un-American because of their lifestyle. Whatever they do, they eat their clothes. Now, Judge Pirro is of Lebanese ancestry, and there was a time when Lebanese Americans would have got a hard time. Well, they still do if they're Muslims. I know she's of a Christian background. So we're all products of our environment, our circumstances, and that includes our apparel. So it was a fascinating demonstration of the interaction of race, of religion, and constitutionalism in what Judge Pirro said. This is part of the culture war, extending even to what you wear in your head. Well, if these women cover their hair with a cowboy hat, maybe we should be all right with that. It's not the head covering per se that matters, I don't think. So it's difficult to counter her because of her ignorance of Islam. Anyway, looking to another poster girl of Fox News, Laura Ingraham, or is it Ingraham? I think it's pronounced the formal way. And she had the nerve to claim that these detention centres on the border are like summer camps. Well, I pity her children, her adopted children. Perhaps that's where they begin this summer, if only she could get them in. Will she be sending her children somewhere similar? Perhaps not. These children at the summer camps, they have no contact with their parents in many cases. The parents can't trace them, don't know where they are. That's frightening. Now, you're not there voluntarily. Now, I know the parents cross voluntarily, the children didn't cross voluntarily. I don't think they have a lot of fun activities to keep it going, and not a huge amount of money is spent on this. So the detention centres, they're not as bad as some people pretend. Not necessarily saying it's wrong to detain people when they cross the border illegally, or even splitting up families. Partly you've got to find out that this child really is the child of that parent, not kidnapped or something like that. But to claim these things are just as good as a place to go on holiday and really enjoy yourself, that really is preposterous. What did Tucker Carlson say? Saying how Iraqis are monkeys, they should obey, that Iraqis don't use lavatory paper or forks. Well, I've had lunch with a number of Iraqis and they've all used forks. As for their lavatorial habits, I can't say. But obviously a long time ago, people didn't have lavatory paper. They just use water or something like that. And that's that. And some people even claim that that's cleaner. So their lifestyle sometimes is a bit different, what they consider to be acceptable behaviour. Sitting on the floor, it's not wrong, it's just different, it's not inferior. But you see Tucker Carlson as a white supremacist, no doubt about that, and particularly an American supremacist. And they should obey. Well, Iraq was liberated, so we're told, and therefore the Iraqis should determine what goes on there, not the United States. It's meant to be bringing them democracy, which is not simply taking orders from Uncle Sam, and then you have to snap to attention. So there's this ideological concept which pervades Fox News's coverage, and that is of the master race, of being the American people who are the master race, even though the United States is ethnically diverse, something which seems to deeply trouble many of the Fox News anchors and show hosts, and the mistreatment of other races is held up to be laudable. There's particularly white Americans is the viewership of Fox, not exclusively, and the Fox News hosts are almost without exception white. Nothing wrong with that, but that white does seem to be the norm for them. Better white behaviour, whatever that is something that should be promoted, and that's why they're so adoring of Donald Trump, who's so white supremacist. You know, Trump, who said that a Mexican American judge wasn't an American, shouldn't be a judge, and blah blah blah. The man who was discriminating against African Americans in the 70s, as a federal investigation found. Not an electoral fix, long before anybody knew he had any ambitions to enter the political forum. So how can I summarise what Fox News is about, or its attitude towards non-whites? Well, Fox News is about hyper-aggression, but it's about the dehumanisation of other races and other nationalities, and the justification of cruelty towards non-whites in the United States and abroad. So it seems to be that ethnicity is a central factor in so much of what Fox News does and how it covers things. Looking at Black Lives Matter, it ought to be uncontroversial, that statement. Yes, I know White Lives Matter as well, but whites are not shot at the same rate by the police. I realise you can break down the statistics under what circumstances do black people interact with the police and so forth. But there have been many occasions when really there's been no justification for shooting this black person at all. It's been completely unwarranted. Killing him, he was unarmed, wasn't doing anything, or he had a gun. He's allowed to have a gun, as Fox News will be the first to underscore. So Fox News constantly railing against immigrants, legal as well as illegal, lambasting them, but never taking aim at Trump for bringing in two wives from abroad. So it really is nefarious, and is obviously serving the interests of the capital-owning class, and some of them watch Fox News, but most of their viewership is blue-collar. Now, there are people who are those with substantial property who abominate the Fox News worldview, as I do. It appears that some people are incapable of developing their cognitive faculties to a great extent, and they don't perceive that Fox News is about scaring the poor into attacking other poor people, which then lets the exploiters off the hook. So it's the poorest people have too much money. It's staggering. That's with the Fox News view, that the people who are picking vegetables for $5 an hour, that they are overpaid and they are taking away jobs from Americans, rather than trying to make sure that there are decently paid jobs for Americans, as in raising wages. So the idea that by letting immigrants in the United States is sowing the seeds of his own destruction is not a new one. It's been going on almost as long as the United States has been around. You know, since the United States was founded, hundreds of millions of immigrants have arrived in the United States, but it's just the next 1,000 in the caravan would be the absolute downfall of the United States. It's preposterous beyond words. So the transfer of power to a non-white majority is already inescapable, and what a day that will be. It'll be thrilling to see Fox News being so discomposed by it. So Fox News, they play on white anxiety very craftily, and they probably notice that blue-collar workers are deeply worried about automation. It's troubling for someone who's just an appendage of flesh on a machine, as Marx would say. The unevenness of economic growth is not asked about by Fox News. Why is it the top 1% see their wealth growing rapidly, whereas in real terms, the lower, say 80% of the population have seen their wealth sag? So it's a lie of omission not to talk about this salient fact. So America is not a tottering structure, and America is not going to perish from too many Hispanics moving into the country. So you see how Fox News has so often manipulated the news because of their penchant for supporting ultra-capitalist policies. I say that, but obviously it will be socialism for the wealthy, it'd be tax breaks, it'd be subventions for certain corporations, with state governments, with the federal government. So the already very profitable corporations make even more money. So prior to 2016, Fox was suppressing some troubling news about Trump. Notice how Fox shows this enormous fascination with war, with terrorism, with crime, but never with healthcare, education, the environment, anything like that. If it was something to do with violence, they like that one. I suppose it's dramatic. Now, I know violent events should be reported. They are important. They impact on people. But what they do is they amplify this to the relative exclusion of bread and butter issues, of things we're actually trying to help people rather than hurt them. Now, sometimes we need to hurt people because they're dangerous to society, but we don't need to hurt quite as many people as Fox News would have us believe. They suggest that colleges are far left madrasas. I've seen them saying that on shows. And the trouble is sometimes they're on the money when they say that. It's true. There are far left professors and ultra-left undergraduates and so on. But it is possible to have a certain opinion and not to evangelize for it. So just to teach people, not preach, not be indoctrinating, keep your views to yourself, do things in an even-handed manner. But I think that's something that Fox News wouldn't grasp, since they make no attempt to do things in a non-partisan fashion. So the working class in the United States appears to be increasingly frustrated, impatient, discontented, and almost hopeless. So Trump expressed their rage and channeled it to the ballot box. You see how hypercapitalism lacks widespread support, which is why Fox has to latch onto God, guns, gays, terror, immigration, cars, anti-environmentalism, and so on. That resonates with a lot of their viewership. Who wouldn't say, shouldn't we have tax breaks for the super rich? Shouldn't we make healthcare unaffordable? That's not going to be popular. So they can't find the limits of the blame to the other, to ethnic minorities, to immigrants, to people outside the United States. So it's a highly convenient rationalization of this need to detest others. It's an instinctive desire in many people. And pseudo-scientific arguments are advanced to claim that there's no such thing as climate change, that the whole thing is a hoax, is the categorical denial of climate change, no matter how irrefutable the evidence. There's a yearning for security and money amongst Fox News viewers. And of course, if we did something to clean up the environment, that actually would cost money. That would cost some jobs, and you couldn't have such a big car and you couldn't drive so far. So I suspect that a lot of the American proletariat feel this fear of being déclassé. They used to have decently paid factory jobs, but those are going. There's status anxiety. So perhaps they like Trump for cutting corners, for cheating, saying, well, what a guy, I wish I could do that, defraud people on property. But it's more wonder they put their faith in this brash New Yorker because of the supposed soundness of his uncompromising views on Mexico and Muslims, and these two demonized groups, they're the ones who are taking away their jobs or who are trying to slaughter their children or something, so Fox News would have them believe. Now, there's this, what's the expression again? Communal culpability. It's planned on all Muslims everywhere that they are to blame, even the ones who are valiantly fighting against Al-Qaeda and ISIS, even ones who are victims of these terrorist organizations, as they often are. The difference between Sunni and Shia, that's completely glossed over. Most Muslim governments are actively against ISIS and Al-Qaeda, but you wouldn't expect your average Fox News viewer to know that. So, abominating others and feeling inherently superior, that's very congenial to the impulses of many people. It's difficult if you grew up in a superpower not to be conceited like that. So their sincerity should not be impugned. Even if their views are nauseating, they can still be heartfelt. These are some urges as old as humanity to other a different ethnicity and to try to lay all the blame on them, scapegoating them. But we ought to grow up and be more civilized, to be educated out of it. So many voters fell for Trump's imposture, and even the sagacious can sometimes deceive themselves. So it's not just self-delusion by Trump, there's been voluntary fraud on behalf of millions of people who decided not to hear what they just heard, not to see what they just saw, to turn off their critical faculties and believe him, even his most outrageous or incredible claims, to disregard his constant lying. So conscience does not slumber in him, since he doesn't have a conscience in the first instance, but it flabbergasts me the way other people have decided to turn off their conscience when it comes to Trump. So perhaps the appeal of Trump for ordinary voters is centered less on economics and more on status. Flag waving, MAGA, and he's going to make sure that you have your decently paid permanent job, reopen the factories. He's perilously close to racism, what he says. There's a slippery slope from saying legal immigrants, even legal ones, are taking our jobs, to think that race is all bad. Now, it's true that legal immigrants do sometimes take jobs, and fair play to them. They're allowed to. They're not bad people, and after 5 years, they're not immigrants. They're Americans. Where did your ancestors come from? Unless you're nothing but a Native American. So I realised these are reasonable concerns, and there ought to be some limit placed on immigration. The country should be quite selective. The United States is often very selective. It's a pain in the neck to get in there. So perpetuating racial animus is obviously odious. Racial animus ought to be dying down as we intermingle so much. We're all enmeshed with each other these days. We live in a globalized world. But unfortunately, it hasn't led to racism disappearing. Indeed, there's been a recrudescence of it under Trump in the United States, with more racist attacks. But there's a vague spot as to who is white enough. Are some Hispanics white? Few of them vote for Trump. So Trump does not aim at the overthrow of a rival power, unlike previous presidents. In this, I've got to give him a bit of credit. He has, I suppose, his positive program to put into effect, as he would say, the wall. It was a concrete policy, forgive the pun, but impractical. But it seemed like he was a visionary to many of his voters the first time. There was no agreed program on the expropriation of land for the wall, and then there was his vacillation on the state of emergency, although he eventually introduced that. So we were so nebulous in other issues, these things weren't thought through, there were no particulars, there wasn't a menu with prices, his program. It was all trust me, it was all showmanship, it was all playing to people's fantasies, as he would say in The Art of the Deal. So according to his formulation, immigrants are always bad unless they're his wives. Anyway, toughness appears to be a test of self-worth for so many people who are Republicans in the United States. Constitutionalism, that's what the Republican Party used to be about, but now Trump admires dictatorial power. He openly gushes about it, extolling the virtues of the cruelest tyrants in the world. Fox News always accused of Obama behaving like a dictator, issuing executive orders, but they are deafeningly silent when Trump does the same. So Trump abruptly introduces executive orders. He likes eliminating term limits. He hasn't said he wants to do something in the United States. He was admiring of that when President Xi did that in China. So Trump's trade war may well have unfortunate economic consequences for the very people it's supposed to help. The experiment may yet have to be dropped and may lead to further bitterness in the Rust Belt. The temporary relaxation of sanctions has alleviated some of the harmful consequences, some of the distress, but I don't think it brought back any factories. Sanctions have not served their purpose, therefore. Anyway, so who's profiting from the tariffs? I don't know. Nobody's investing in factories that I can see. But that is big government, tariffs, something the Republican Party is supposed to oppose. China constitutes an increasingly puissant rival, and China prevails in Africa, but obviously Trump's got no idea how to counter her. It would take a great leader to reconcile smokestack industries to climate change, and no such visionaries emerged. Trump certainly isn't one of them. But the ultimate benefit in the United States would be clean energy, and also not having to import energy, but he's making no progress on that one. Indeed, they're going into reverse on that one. So the struggle for the succession to the Democratic nomination is now on. Many covet it. Perhaps they think this will be a bumper year for them, 2020. But they need to address this acute sense of insecurity that's predominating amongst the working class. And there's a particular brand of fanaticism on immigration and guns amongst Republican voters, and difficult to win them over on these issues because the Republican Party's gone somewhere that the Democrats are not willing to follow. And it's Republican fixation on those issues is untampered by any sense of proportional reason. There are very fierce emotions there. They jealously guard citizenship, even though so many people have become American citizens. There's so many citizens there today who are not born citizens. And it's as though that Republicans can't envisage immigration being a good thing. Occasionally say, oh, well, we'll take a few IT engineers. At the same time wanting permanent war, which creates refugees who then want to come to the United States. A permanent peaceful end to Middle Eastern wars is not desired, because they wouldn't have so many weapons produced then. So Trump has dropped regime change as an objective, and that at least is laudable. There was this doctrinaire conviction of the rightness of the American way of life that must be imposed by a drone strike on those with a different mindset. The universality of US institutions was assumed to be self-evident, that these things could be transplanted elsewhere, that you could transform Iraq into America, which is preposterous. It was no more likely that you could turn America into Iraq. So, but there's no rigidity on democracy amongst Trump, I suppose, well, not amongst Trump, in Trump. He deep down doesn't believe in anything. There's a strange atomized individuality about guns and welfare amongst Republican voters, even when these things are to their disadvantage. But Medicare and Medicaid, many of them like that, obviously not realising their federal government programs. So it's as though Republicans think that no collective activity ought to be run by the government when it comes to reducing suffering, like hospitals, or schools. I know they're mostly state governments, but resistance to Common Core because it's a federal government thing, or federal funding for universities or anything like that. They're not against national parks, although Trump has talked about selling those off. So US politics is not about an amorphous mass. The population can be divided into chunks by ethnicity, age, income, education, region, and give you a fairly good idea how each chunk, for want of a better word, is going to vote. Now, some of these chunks are fertile territory for Fox. Demographic sectors, perhaps I could call them, or a stratum of society, but it's not strictly socioeconomic. There's some vertical divides as well as horizontal. So natural habitat for Fox viewers is the South, the Midwest. And there's this over-brooding threat from outside that and Fox constantly want to talk about. This misdirects people from real dangers like the lack of affordable health care or from the unclean environment. So some issues can be solved and others only reduced, but they obviously want to focus only on the ones that can only be reduced, things to do with violence. So there's a relative role of identity issues and economic issues that Fox constantly addresses. There's linkage here. They're going to leverage support for one because the others. Reduced immigration equals more jobs. You want more jobs, you've got to reduce immigration. And of course, there is a grain of truth in that. Not everything they say is complete furphy. The tax cut that Fox was banging on about, and it's for a microscopically small proportion of the population, but it plays well with the financially illiterate. And many people can't adjust to the knowledge economy because they have very little knowledge. So the final phase for humans in certain jobs is coming up as driving anything, or even in retail perhaps. So there's an assumption that the government should never provide jobs, well, except in the military. And it's seen as inevitable that immigration can only be bad. And I realize too much immigration, or immigration of undesirable individuals, really can be bad, but they take that idea to the fair. So the GOP makes its critique that any federal government program could be Marxian, unless, of course, it's to do with the military. They've demonized publicly funded healthcare, even though it's delivered such fantastic outcomes for a low cost in so many other countries. The American dream is aptly so called because it is unreal, like all dreams. And the benefit of the super affluent, that determines the Fox News worldview. Whatever is good for the super rich is good for everyone, even when it's not good for most people. So they want almost no public services, but that's not applied to the armed forces, that principle. And deliberation on what is good for America's total wealth is going on, but not what's good for distribution. Maldistribution is never discussed. America is awesome. It's animated by unthinking chauvinism, Fox News. Well, they're very subjective in assessing greatness, and it's all about guns, absolutism on guns. They seek might for its own sake and not to do something positive with it. Anyway, I could go on all day, but I think I better leave it there before going on to how this impacts electoral politics.